The afternoon sun poured through the streaky windows of the Blue Plate Diner, catching dust particles that danced in the golden beams. Shanice Williams wiped down the counter with practiced circles, her mind half on the task and half on the bills waiting at home. 7 years she'd been working here, and some days it felt like 70. Her feet ached in her worn sneakers, a constant reminder of the double shifts she'd been picking up since her youngest started needing braces. The bell above the door jingled, and Shanice glanced up at the old clock on the wall, 4:15, right on time. In walked the boy, skinny as a rail, with clothes that hung off his small frame like they belonged to someone else entirely. He moved like a shadow, sliding into the same corner booth he chose every day, the one with the torn vinyl that nobody wanted. Shanice gave a small nod to Darlene, the other waitress on shift, signaling she handled this one. There was something about the quiet boy that tugged at her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. Grabbing a menu she didn't need to offer, she made her way over. "Order today, hun?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The boy looked up, his eyes too old for his young face, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, barely audible over the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Shanice brought him the water, watching as he wrapped both hands around the glass like it was something precious. His knuckles were dirty, his fingernails chewed down to the quick. As she turned to leave, she caught him staring at a plate of French fries passing by, his gaze so hungry it made something twist inside her chest. Back behind the counter, she punched in an order that would come out of her own pocket. Dale, the manager, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. This wasn't the first time. When the cook slid the plate of eggs and toast across the pass-through window, Shanice added a small bowl of fruit on the side. "Here you go," she said, placing it in front of the boy. "Kitchen made too much. Be ashamed to throw it away." The lie was gentle, meant to preserve his dignity. The boy looked up, surprise flickering across his face. For a moment, Shanice thought he might refuse, but hunger won out. He picked up the fork with trembling fingers. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice so soft she had to lean in to hear it. "Name's Shanice, not ma'am. Makes me feel old," she replied with a warm smile. "What's yours?" "Tommy," he answered after a hesitant pause, like he wasn't used to adults asking his name. Shanice nodded and moved away, giving him space to eat. She watched from the corner of her eye as he took small, careful bites at first, then began to eat with the quiet desperation of someone who didn't know when their next meal would come. The diner filled with the usual evening crowd. Truckers passing through, factory workers coming off shift, a few regulars who came for the meatloaf special on Tuesdays. Shanice moved between tables with coffee pot in hand, taking orders, clearing plates, making small talk. But her attention kept drifting back to the corner booth. When Tommy finished, he sat with his hands folded on the table, like he wasn't sure what to do next. Shanice slid by with a coffee pot. "Good?" she asked. He nodded, eyes cast down at the empty plate. "You come from the middle school down the road?" Another nod. "Well," Shanice said, her voice casual despite the concern tightening her throat, "that plate wants eating every day. Would be nice if someone helped out with that." Tommy's eyes darted up to meet hers, confusion mixing with a fragile hope. Shanice gave him a wink. "Same time tomorrow." "I don't have money," he admitted, his shoulders hunching like he expected to be scolded. "Did I ask for any?" Shanice replied, her tone light but her eyes serious. "This is just between us, okay?" Something shifted in Tommy's posture then, not quite relaxing, but the wire-tight tension eased just a fraction. He slid out of the booth, his backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. "Thank you," he whispered again and hurried out into the late afternoon light. Shanice watched through the window as he walked away, his small figure getting smaller as he headed toward the run-down apartments beyond the highway. She didn't know his story yet, where his parents were, why hunger had become his companion, but she knew enough. As she cleared his plate, she made a silent promise to herself and to him. Tomorrow, she'd have a meal waiting, and the day after that, and after that, for as long as he needed. Some things went beyond tips and paychecks. Some things were simply right. She didn't know it then, but that simple plate of eggs would be the first step on a path that would change both their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blended into months. The quiet ritual between Shanice and Tommy became as much a part of the Blue Plate Diner as the flickering neon sign outside. Every afternoon at 4:15, he would slip through the door, a little ghost in two big clothes, and make his way to the corner booth. And every day, Shanice would have something waiting for him. Little by little, the boy began to thaw. One rainy Tuesday, as thunder rumbled outside and the diner was nearly empty, Tommy spoke more than his usual whispered thanks. "My grandma's sick again," he said, pushing peas around his plate with a fork. "She couldn't get up this morning." Shanice set down the coffee pot she was carrying and slid into the booth across from him. The vinyl seat squeaked beneath her weight. "You live with your grandma?" she asked gently, careful not to push too hard. Tommy nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. "Since I was 6, Dad's in prison. Mom left before that." The words came out flat, like he was reading a grocery list rather than sharing the broken pieces of his life. Shanice's heart squeezed in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. Kids like Tommy didn't want pity. They'd had enough of that. "Your grandma, she takes good care of you?" "She tries," Tommy said, a simple answer that told a complicated story. "But her diabetes makes her real tired. Sometimes she can't get to the store or stand long enough to cook." Shanice nodded, understanding blooming. The boy wasn't just hungry because they were poor. He was hungry because his caretaker was too ill to feed him properly. After that day, Shanice started preparing take-home containers. Nothing fancy, just leftovers from the daily specials wrapped up in foil with reheating instructions scribbled on napkins. She bought the containers herself from the dollar store, using tips she could have spent on new shoes for her own kids. "For your grandma," she'd say, pressing the packages into Tommy's hands. "Everybody deserves a hot meal." Dale, the manager with a permanently furrowed brow, must have noticed the food that disappeared without ringing up on the register. But he would just adjust his glasses and look the other way. Maybe he had once been a hungry child too, or maybe some kindness still lived beneath his gruff exterior. Either way, Shanice was grateful for his silence. Other waitresses began to join in. Loretta, who'd been serving at the Blue Plate for 20 years, would slip Tommy packets of crackers and extra bread. Vicky, barely out of high school herself, saved apple slices from her own lunch. Even the cook, a mountain of a man called Big Mike, started making Tommy's portions just a little bigger than the menu specified. One afternoon, Tommy arrived with a folded piece of paper clutched in his hand. He passed it to Shanice without a word. Inside was a shakily written note. "Thank you for feeding my boy. God bless you." It was signed simply, Grandma Rose. Shanice tucked the note into her apron pocket, where it stayed for months until the paper wore thin from being unfolded and read so many times. As October chilled into November, Tommy started bringing his worn backpack stuffed with dog-eared textbooks. Shanice watched him labor over math problems while he ate, his forehead wrinkling with concentration. "School going okay?" she asked, refilling his water glass. Tommy shrugged. "Teacher says I'm smart, but sometimes I can't focus 'cause my stomach hurts." "Not anymore," Shanice said firmly. "Not on my watch." Over time, she noticed small changes in him. His cheeks filled out a little. He sat up straighter in the booth. His whispers grew into a soft but steady voice. He began to meet her eyes when he spoke, and occasionally she even caught a fleeting smile. Shanice never told her own children about Tommy. Somehow it felt private, this quiet thing between her and the boy who needed more than just food. Sometimes, driving home after a double shift, her feet throbbing and back aching, she'd wonder what would become of him. Would the meals be enough? Could a few plates of diner food really change anything? She didn't know it yet, but the answer was already unfolding, one day at a time, in ways neither of them could imagine. Winter came early that year, blowing in with a bitter cold that seeped through the diner's old windows. Shanice added an extra layer under her uniform and kept a pot of coffee brewing all day long. The cold brought fewer customers, which meant smaller tips, but it also meant more time to watch Tommy work on his homework in the corner booth. The first snow fell on a Tuesday. Fat, lazy flakes drifted past the windows as Tommy hunched over a science textbook, his pencil moving carefully across a notebook. Shanice brought him hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, not on the menu, but Big Mike had made it special. "What you working on so hard over here?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Tommy looked up, a smudge of graphite on his cheek. "Science project. We're studying the human body." Shanice noticed how his eyes lit up as he spoke. It was the most animated she'd ever seen him. "You like science, huh?" Tommy nodded, then glanced around as if checking who might overhear. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a near whisper despite the nearly empty diner. "I want to be a doctor someday," he confessed, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for ages. "The kind that helps people like my grandma." "A doctor?" Shanice repeated, hiding her surprise. Not because she didn't think he could do it. The boy was smart, no doubt about that, but because he dared to dream so big despite everything stacked against him. "I know it's stupid," Tommy said quickly, shoulders hunching as if preparing for mockery. "Kids like me don't become doctors." Something fierce and protective flared in Shanice's chest. She reached across the table and gently tapped his textbook. "Says who?" she demanded. "You're as smart as anybody. Smarter than most grown folks I know." Tommy shrugged, unconvinced. "My teacher said I got the highest score in the class on our last test, but it don't matter. Doctors need to go to college for years and years. That costs money. Lots of it." Shanice watched him, this boy who'd already figured out how the world worked, already learned its limits before he even hit middle school. It wasn't fair, and it made her blood boil. "Listen here," she said, leaning closer. "Don't you ever let anybody tell you what you can't become. Not your teachers, not your friends, not even your grandma. And especially not yourself." For a moment, they just looked at each other across the worn Formica table. Then Tommy nodded, just once, like he was making a promise. "Show me what you're learning," she said, changing the subject. Tommy turned his textbook around. The page showed a diagram of a heart, all its chambers and valves labeled in tiny print. He began explaining how blood flowed through each part, his voice growing stronger with each word. Shanice only understood half of what he said, but she nodded like it all made perfect sense. That evening, after the dinner rush had ended and Tommy had gone home with another container of food for his grandma, Shanice went to the public library down the street. She hadn't been inside one since her own school days, but the kind-faced librarian helped her find what she needed: information on scholarships and programs for kids who wanted to become doctors. She printed several pages, spending $2.75 from her tip money, and tucked them into her purse. She wasn't sure when or how she'd share them with Tommy, but having them felt like a start. At home that night, after putting her own children to bed, Shanice sat at her small kitchen table with the pages spread out before her. Scholarship applications wanted essays, recommendation letters, and official transcripts. Some required parent signatures. How would Tommy manage all that with a sick grandmother? As she crawled into bed, bone-tired from her double shift, Shanice wondered if she was overstepping. Maybe it wasn't her place to push the boy toward dreams that might end in disappointment. But then she remembered the look in his eyes when he talked about becoming a doctor, like he was seeing a version of himself that nobody else could see. A version that existed only in possibility, not yet real, but not impossible either. No, she decided as sleep pulled her under. It wasn't overstepping to believe in someone. Sometimes a person just needed someone else to see what they could become before they could believe it themselves. Spring brought rain and new flowers, but not Tommy. One day, his corner booth stayed empty at 4:15. Shanice kept glancing at the door, expecting him to rush in late, maybe caught up with school or helping his grandma. But the clock ticked to 5:00, then 6:00, and still no sign of him. "Your little friend not coming today?" Dale asked as he counted the register. Shanice shook her head, trying to ignore the worry gnawing at her stomach. Probably just homesick. But the next day, Tommy didn't come either. Or the day after that. A whole week passed with the corner booth sitting empty every afternoon. Shanice made his usual meal anyway, just in case, wrapping it up when he didn't show and taking it home to her own kids, who wondered why their mom suddenly brought home diner food. After 10 days, Shanice couldn't stand it anymore. During her break, she pulled out her phone and called the middle school. They couldn't give her any information. She wasn't family. She wasn't anything to Tommy, officially speaking. Just a waitress who fed him. "Everything all right?" Loretta asked when she returned to her shift, face tight with worry. "Fine," Shanice lied. "Just checking on something." That night, after her kids were asleep, Shanice drove to the apartment complex Tommy had once mentioned. The buildings were run down, with peeling paint and security doors that didn't fully close. She didn't know which unit was his grandmother's, so she asked a woman smoking on her balcony if she knew where Rose lived, the elderly lady with diabetes and her grandson. "Third floor, end unit," the woman said, eyeing Shanice suspiciously. "Though you might be wasting your time. Haven't seen them in weeks." Heart pounding, Shanice climbed the stairs to the third floor. The door at the end had a paper tape to it. Even from a distance, she could make out the red lettering, EVAC Cheyenne no Tai Se. She knocked anyway, 3 times, then pressed her ear to the door. Nothing but silence answered back. From behind her, an old man poked his head out from another apartment. "They gone," he said simply. "Ambulance came for the old lady. Boy went with her." "When?" Shanice asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. 2-3 weeks, maybe. Time's hard to keep track of these days." He shrugged and disappeared back into his apartment, door closing with a soft click. Shanice stood there for a long moment, staring at the eviction notice. It didn't answer any of her questions. Was Rose okay? Where was Tommy now? Had they found somewhere else to live, or was he in foster care? Did he still get enough to eat? The not knowing was the hardest part. For months, she'd been a small but steady presence in Tommy's life. Now he had vanished, and she had no way to find out if he was all right. Back at the diner, she asked around if anyone had seen a skinny boy with his grandmother. No one had any answers. She checked with the hospital, but without being family, they wouldn't tell her anything. The school was the same. Privacy rules meant they couldn't share where a student had gone. It felt like Tommy had simply disappeared, like he'd never been there at all. The only proof was the empty spot inside Shanice that his absence had created. She still prepared his usual meal every day at 4:15, wrapping it carefully before throwing it away at closing time. Dale noticed but didn't say anything, just adjusted the food costs at the end of the day to cover her ritual. "You can't save everybody," Loretta told her gently one evening, watching as Shanice stared at the empty booth again. "Some folks just pass through our lives for a reason, then they're gone." Shanice nodded, but she couldn't accept it. Not yet. Every time the bell over the door jingled, she looked up, hoping to see Tommy's thin frame slipping into the diner. Every time, disappointment followed. 3 weeks turned into a month. Spring warmed into early summer. Shanice picked up extra shifts to keep busy, to keep her mind off the boy who had disappeared. She started saving the money she would have spent on his meals, tucking the bills into an envelope labeled with his name. For what, she wasn't sure. Maybe she'd donate it to a children's charity. Maybe she was just having trouble letting go. Then came the Thursday when everything changed. The afternoon had been slow, just a few truckers stopping for coffee and pie. Shanice was wiping down the counter when she heard it, not the familiar tinkle of the bell, but the rumble of powerful engines in the parking lot. Through the window, she watched as 4 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up outside the Blue Plate diner. Everyone in the diner froze as the SUVs parked in a neat row outside. They were the kind of vehicles you didn't see in this neighborhood, shiny black monsters with windows so dark you couldn't see who sat inside. The kind that usually meant trouble or important people, and in Shanice's experience, those often went hand in hand. "Lord have mercy," Loretta whispered, peeking through the blinds. "You think it's the feds?" Before anyone could answer, car doors opened and men in dark suits stepped out. They looked around, scanning the parking lot with sunglasses hiding their eyes. One spoke into his wrist, like in the movies. Then the back door of the second SUV opened. A woman emerged, tall and striking in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Shanice made in a month. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her posture perfect as she straightened her jacket and walked toward the diner entrance. 3 of the suited men followed her while the others stayed by the vehicles. The bell jingled. The woman entered first, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. The diner had gone completely silent. Even Big Mike poked his head out from the kitchen, spatula in hand, mouth hanging open. Dale hurried forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "Welcome to the Blue Plate. Table for 4. The woman surveyed the nearly empty diner, her eyes landing briefly on each person before moving on. "That would be fine," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "Somewhere private, if possible." Dale seated them at the far end of the diner, away from the few other customers. He turned to Shanice, panic in his eyes. "You take this one," he said under his breath. I'm too old for whatever this is. Shanice grabbed her notepad, her heart pounding as she approached the table. The suited men sat facing the door, leaving the woman with her back to the entrance. "Good afternoon," Shanice said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Can I start you all with some drinks?" The woman looked up, studying Shanice's face. "Water is fine," she said, then added, "You're Shanice Williams, aren't you?" Shanice's throat went dry. How did this stranger know her name? Was this about Tommy? Was she in some kind of trouble? "Yes, ma'am," she answered carefully. The woman smiled, transforming her serious face into something warmer. "My name is Dr. Vanessa Reynolds. I've been hoping to meet you." Before Shanice could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. She turned, more out of habit than anything else, and the water pitcher nearly slipped from her hands. Tommy stood in the doorway, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. His clothes were new, his hair freshly cut. Beside him stood an elderly woman in a wheelchair, his grandmother, Shanice guessed. A nurse in scrubs stood behind the wheelchair. "Tommy?" Shanice whispered, unable to believe her eyes. The boy's face broke into a wide smile, the first real smile she ever seen from him. He rushed forward, stopping just short of hugging her, suddenly shy again. "Hi, Miss Shanice," he said, his voice stronger than she remembered. "You had me worried sick," she said, setting down the pitcher before she really did drop it. "Where have you been?" "Are you okay? Is your grandma all right?" Tommy glanced at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. "Grandma got real sick," he explained. "They took her to the big hospital downtown. I was staying with a foster family for a while, but now we're getting a new apartment. With an elevator so Grandma doesn't have to use the stairs." Shanice looked from Tommy to his grandmother to the elegant woman in the blue suit who was watching the scene with interest. "I don't understand," Shanice said finally. "What's going on? Who are you people?" Dr. Reynolds stood, extending her hand. "Perhaps we should all sit down together. We have quite a story to tell you, Ms. Williams, and I believe you're a very important part of it." Tommy tugged gently at Shanice's sleeve. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Dr. Reynolds is nice. She helped Grandma. And I told her about you, about how you fed me every day and believed in me." Shanice's eyes filled with tears. "You did?" Tommy nodded. "Come sit with us? Please?" Shanice looked at Dale, who was watching the scene unfold with his mouth hanging open. He made a shooing motion with his hands. "Go on," he mouthed. "I'll cover your tables." She followed Tommy to the large booth where Dr. Reynolds and her suited companions waited, feeling like she was walking in a dream. The grandmother reached out and caught Shanice's hand as she passed, squeezing it with surprising strength. "Thank you," the old woman said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for feeding my boy when I couldn't." They sat together in the largest booth, an unlikely gathering that drew curious glances from the few other customers. Dr. Reynolds ordered coffee for everyone. Tommy slid in next to Shanice, while his grandmother's wheelchair was positioned at the end of the table. The men in suits kept a respectful distance, sitting at a nearby table but staying alert. First things first, Dr. Reynolds began after Loretta had poured coffee all around. "Ms. Williams, I want to thank you for what you've done for Tommy and his grandmother." Shanice shook her head. "I didn't do much, just made sure the boy ate." "Just?" Rose, Tommy's grandmother, reached over and patted Shanice's hand. Her fingers were thin but warm. "There's no just about it. You fed my boy when I couldn't. That's everything." Shanice felt her cheeks warm. Anyone would have done the same. "But they didn't," Dr. Reynolds said. "You did. And that's why I'm here today." She took a sip of her coffee, then set the mug down carefully. "I should explain. I'm the chief of pediatric medicine at Memorial Hospital downtown. 3 weeks ago, Rose was brought in with severe complications from her diabetes. Her blood sugar was dangerously high, and she needed immediate treatment." Rose nodded. "I passed out at home. Tommy called 911. Dr. Reynolds continued. "While Rose was in treatment, we needed to figure out what to do with Tommy. He refused to leave his grandmother's side. Our hospital social worker got involved, and that's when we started hearing this remarkable story." Tommy looked up from his hot chocolate, whipped cream dotting his upper lip. "I told them about you," he said to Shanice. "About how you gave me food every day and even made extra for Grandma. and how you said I could be a doctor someday if I wanted. Shanice remembered their conversation over the science textbook, how fiercely she had wanted him to believe in himself. She hadn't realized how much her words had stuck with him. Dr. Reynolds smiled. Tommy told us he wants to be a doctor like me someday. He said you were the only person who ever told him it was possible. Because it is, Shanice said firmly. That's exactly right, Dr. Reynolds agreed. But here's where the story gets interesting. While Tommy was staying with a temporary foster family, I spent some time with him. He's an extraordinary child, Ms. Williams. His understanding of science, his curiosity, his intelligence, they're exceptional. So I ran some tests. Tests? Shanice asked, confused. Academic assessments, Dr. Reynolds clarified. With Rose's permission, of course. Tommy scored in the top percentile nationally. He has the kind of mind that should be nurtured, challenged. She leaned forward. Do you know what I do besides treating patients, Ms. Williams? I run the Reynolds Foundation for Medical Education. The name clicked in Shanice's memory. She'd seen it on the news once, something about scholarships for underprivileged kids. Our foundation identifies children with exceptional potential who might otherwise never get the opportunity to pursue medicine because of financial or social barriers. Dr. Reynolds looked at Tommy with genuine admiration. We provide mentorship, educational support, and eventually, full scholarships to medical school. Rose wiped tears from her eyes. They want to help my Tommy become a doctor. For real. Tommy couldn't contain his excitement any longer. They're gonna put me in a special school, Miss Shanice, with science labs and everything. And Dr. Reynolds is gonna be my mentor. Shanice felt like the room was spinning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like Tommy, not in her world. But why are you telling me all this? She asked. Dr. Reynolds' expression softened. Because Tommy insisted. He said he wouldn't accept our help unless you knew that you deserved to see what your kindness had set in motion. More than that, Tommy added quickly. I wanted Dr. Reynolds to meet you, to see you're the kind of person who helps people even when you don't have to, even when it's hard. Dr. Reynolds nodded, and he was right, which brings me to the second reason I'm here. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. The Reynolds Foundation doesn't just help children, Ms. Williams. We also employ people who understand what it means to care for others, who recognize potential where others might miss it. Shanice stared at the card, not comprehending. We want to offer you a position, Dr. Reynolds said simply. Part-time to start, coordinating community outreach for our foundation. It would allow you to reduce your hours here, spend more time with your own children. The diner seemed to fall away as Shanice tried to process what she was hearing. A new job? Working with kids like Tommy? And all because she had done what anyone should do, feed a hungry child? I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? Tommy's hand found hers under the table. Because you saw me, he said quietly, when nobody else did. 6 months later, the Blue Plate Diner was busier than it had ever been. The lunch crowd buzzed with conversation as Shanice moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. But something was different about her now. She wore a manager's badge pinned to her uniform, and she moved with a confidence that hadn't been there before. The bell over the door jingled, and Shanice looked up, smiling when she saw who it was. Tommy walked in wearing a navy blazer with an emblem on the pocket, the logo of the Reynolds Academy for Science and Medicine. His grandmother Rose followed behind, her wheelchair pushed by a home health aide. They were regular visitors now, coming every Saturday for lunch. Miss Shanice, Tommy called out, waving as they made their way to what everyone now called Tommy's booth, the corner spot where their story had begun. Look at you in that fancy jacket, Shanice said, giving him a quick hug. How was the science fair? Did you win? Tommy grinned, pulling a blue ribbon from his pocket. First place. My project on diabetes treatments got the highest score. Dr. Reynolds says they might even publish it in the student journal. That's my boy, Rose said proudly, patting the seat beside her. Come sit with us a minute, Shanice. Tell us how the new program's going. Shanice glanced around the diner. It was busy, but Loretta caught her eye and nodded, silently saying she'd cover for a few minutes. Shanice slid into the booth across from them. The tutoring program's taking off, she said. We've got 15 kids now, coming twice a week. Big Mike's teaching them cooking on Thursdays. You should see how they love it." After Dale had retired, Shanice had taken over as manager, with Dr. Reynolds' foundation helping to transform the diner into something more. 3 afternoons a week, the back room that used to store extra supplies became a tutoring center where medical students from the university helped local kids with science and math homework. The foundation covered the costs, and Shanice coordinated everything when she wasn't working at her part-time foundation job. "And your kids?" Rose asked. "How are they liking their new school?" Shanice smiled, thinking of her son and daughter. With her better income, she'd been able to move them to an apartment in a safer neighborhood with better schools. "They're doing great. My girl's talking about college now. Never thought I'd hear those words so soon." The bell jingled again as Dr. Reynolds walked in, carrying a small gift bag. She spotted them and came over, setting the bag in front of Tommy. "A little congratulations for your science fair win," she said, then turned to Shanice. "And I have news. The board approved the expansion. We can take on 10 more students next fall and hire a full-time coordinator." She raised an eyebrow meaningfully at Shanice. "If you know anyone who might be interested in the position." Shanice felt a flutter of excitement. A full-time position with the foundation would mean benefits, steady hours, no more late-night shifts. It would mean security for her family. "I might know someone," she said with a smile. As Dr. Reynolds joined them for lunch, Shanice looked around the diner that had been her workplace for so many years. Near the entrance hung a framed photograph. Shanice and Tommy on his first day at the Reynolds Academy, both beaming at the camera. Beside it was a simple wooden plaque that Dale had made before he retired. It read, "Sometimes the smallest kindness changes everything." The diner had changed. The neighborhood was changing too, slowly but surely. New tutoring centers were opening in other businesses inspired by what had happened at the Blue Plate. Kids who'd never dreamed beyond high school were now talking about college, about careers, about possibilities. And it had all started with a plate of eggs and toast offered to a hungry boy with no expectation of return. Later, as the lunch rush died down and Tommy showed off his science fair project to the kitchen staff, an older woman Shanice didn't recognize came in and took a seat at the counter. "I heard about what you do here," the woman said as Shanice brought her a menu. "My grandson, he's real good at math, but his school doesn't challenge him. Someone told me to come talk to you." Shanice smiled and reached for the application forms she now kept behind the counter. One small kindness rippling outward, touching life after life after life. "Let me tell you about our program," she began, sitting down beside the woman. "It all started with a boy who wanted to be a doctor." And somewhere in the kitchen, Tommy laughed, the sound of it bright and full of promise, nothing like the whisper-quiet boy who had once slipped through the door at 4:15, hungry for more than just food.